To all of you who lost loved ones, who endured intolerable loneliness, and who struggled with your businesses, I am truly sorry. And this afternoon, I am offering my resignation to the Prime Minister.
Tonight, why did Allegra Stratton resign over remarks made about a Christmas party if, as the PM insists, the party never happened?
Have you lied to the public, Prime Minister?
Tonight, the PM faces ridicule from Labour for sticking to his week-old lines and fury from his backbenchers who call his new COVID measures a diversionary tactic. Is the country facing new restrictions just to help the PM out of a hole? Also tonight, we look at the science behind the rules and ask how willing the public are to follow Plan B when questions of trust hang over the government. Hello, good evening. The PM is still insisting he was assured there was no party and that no rules were broken. In spite of this, his advisor was forced to quit her job today for remarks she made surrounding this non-explained gathering. During a feisty exchange in the Commons, Boris Johnson appointed his Cabinet Secretary to launch an inquiry into the non-party, but said it wouldn't be extended to examine other alleged Downing Street gatherings unless, that is, Simon Case chose to do so himself. And into this chaos, the Prime Minister then threw the least surprising press conference ever, announcing stricter COVID measures in England, working from home where possible, and vaccine passports in major gatherings. The question now is one of public health, government messaging, and our willingness to listen when issues of trust are so pervasive. Here's our political editor, Nick Watt. And Nick, it sounds like you've been hearing of deep unease amongst some of the senior Cabinet colleagues tonight.
That's right. So there is unease in the Cabinet at the speed of these new restrictions. One Cabinet member told me that introducing them today was really bad timing. They simply said, why not wait until next week? And the significance of that is that senior Tories say they were told by ministers yesterday that this wouldn't happen until next week. One former Cabinet minister told me it's strange doing this now. Why now? And they said that it was obviously a dead cat strategy. But they then added it's a pretty cynical and inept one because it looks so obvious and it's blowing up in their face. Now, Downing Street say there is absolutely no politics to these new COVID restrictions. The new variant is spreading very rapidly. That was pointed out by Professor Chris Whitty, the UK government's chief medical advisor, and he fully endorsed these measures today.
Nick, what is the sense you're getting of the Prime Minister's position within his own party?
Well, I did speak to one member of the Cabinet who was very impressed by Boris Johnson's apology in the Commons for that video of number 10 aides making light of the Christmas party. This minister told me Boris had to be firm, and he was. But then I do have to say I found widespread dismay amongst ministers and backbenchers. One minister told me this is a catastrophe. Colleagues are really down on this. And then listen to this. This is a former Cabinet Minister who is an original Boris Johnson supporter. They said to me, Boris is like the Bond villain. He will escape from the sinking ship in a pod with his cat. He will leave behind a sinking wreck. That process is now underway, and this is doing immense damage to our party. And then listen to this. This is from an original supporter of Boris Johnson who is also a strong Brexiteer. And this person said to me, former minister said, the tectonic plates are shifting. A lot of colleagues are saying we need a reset. And by that, we mean a change of Prime Minister. I have just had enough. It is mishap after mishap. And then this former minister went on to say, I thought that Boris Johnson was a once-in-a-generation transformational leader. I was right. Only he could have delivered Brexit. He did that. But now we can't keep going on like this person said to me, for the next 2 years. We will lose. Now, when you hear language like that, you sort of consult an elder. So I did consult a grandee, a very measured figure in the party. And they told me that they had heard colleagues in the tea room saying that the Prime Minister is on the skids and the tectonic plates are shifting. But then this person said to me, I would say Boris Johnson is now on probation. Maybe he'll have a good Christmas and we'll come back and all will be fine. But this is a weak Downing Street, and I'm not sure that it's going to change, because the problem is Boris Johnson simply will not take advice. He will not listen to people. So, Emily, look, it's been a potentially defining 48 hours for a Prime Minister who does seem to be stumbling rather regularly. A troubled Prime Minister struggling to command events. Normally the master of his destiny, Boris Johnson now finds himself assailed on multiple fronts.
Why should people at home, listening to the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State, do things that people working in number 10 Downing Street are not prepared to do?
A rebellion brewing tonight over new COVID restrictions. Anger fuelled after Downing Street staff made light of a Christmas party last year, reportedly held in defiance of the rules.
My remarks seemed to make light of the rules that people were doing everything to obey. That was never my intention.
And this evening that aide fell on her sword.
I make no excuses for the frivolity with which the subject was handled in that rehearsal that people saw in that clip, and there could be no excuse for it.
Some contrition from the Prime Minister and the announcement of an inquiry into whether and how the party was held. An unhappy political mess which has prompted many Tories to accuse the Prime Minister in private of tightening COVID restrictions to deflect attention away from his troubles. The new changes will mean that in England, from Monday, there'll be guidance to work from home where people can. There'll be a legal requirement from Friday to wear masks in most public indoor venues, though not for hospitality settings. Proof of double vaccination or a negative COVID test will be needed to enter nightclubs and venues with large crowds. And daily testing will be introduced for people who come into contact with someone with COVID.
While the picture may get better, and I sincerely hope that it will, we know that the remorseless logic of exponential growth could lead to a big rise in hospitalisations and therefore, sadly, in deaths. And that's why it's now the proportionate and the responsible thing to move to Plan B in England, while continuing to work closely with our colleagues in the devolved administrations, so we slow the spread of the virus, buy ourselves the time to get yet more boosters into arms.
Across the road in Parliament, deep unhappiness on his side.
It's déjà vu all over again. Can I remind the Secretary of State that in March 2020 we were asked to impose restrictions for 3 weeks while the health service capacity was increased. Can he tell the House how much that capacity has now been increased?
And today he comes with his latest in a long line of arbitrary, unnecessary socialist measures, supported by the socialists on the other side of the House as well.
One rebel issued a call to arms.
Well, I hope everyone will vote against it, because vaccine passports should be completely unacceptable in this country. This is not a path that we should go down in a society that prides itself, a government, frankly, that should pride itself on the free and liberal, with a small L, tradition that the UK is proud of.
These corridors will play host next week to a pre-Christmas rebellion by Conservative MPs whose unease about the speed of these new COVID restrictions is shared right up into the Cabinet. And those rebels and ministers have another concern, that the apparently lackadaisical approach of some in number 10 towards the rules has fundamentally weakened the authority of the government in enforcing new restrictions. Symbols of peace and goodwill on display at the seat of power, but not in the air in a vociferous Conservative Party.
Nick. What there? Well, we invited the government onto the programme tonight. They said no, but I'm pleased to say we're joined in the studio by the Labour Shadow Leader of the House of Commons, Thangham Debonair, and by Senior Conservative Backbencher Peter Bone. It's very nice to have you both. Peter, can I start with you? Are you feeling the mood that Nick described amongst your colleagues tonight?
No, I did listen to that, and I thought that was a little over the top. I think there's a lot of support for Boris. There's a lot of unhappiness about some of the measures announced today, and I think there will be a major rebellion on those on Tuesday when it comes before the House. But unfortunately, Labour's going to support them anyway, so the government will get through. So there is unhappiness about what was announced today, but generally I think that they're very supportive of the Prime Minister, as I am.
What about his answers to Keir Starmer today? Did you believe he was telling the truth?
Oh, absolutely. Someone told him, look, if you're the Prime Minister, you've got 1,001 things, and he probably said, look, there's a problem about parties. Did they happen? And someone went off and came back and told him, probably someone quite senior down, said to him, no, they didn't happen, and that's what he's told Parliament. Now, if I'd been Keir Starmer, I think he missed a trick by not saying, who told you, Prime Minister? Because Prime Minister was obviously relying on somebody telling him. You can't expect the Prime Minister to go skirting around.
But just explain then, why was Allegra Stratton the fall guy for the Prime Minister if he's sure that there was no party?
I felt very sorry. I felt very sorry for her. I didn't see why she had to resign. We've all done these mock interviews. You will have done these mock interviews. Yeah, and you know there's a black humour there when you're trying to work out what to say. So, and we only saw.
But I just don't understand why, if there was no, we wouldn't have made anything of that video at all if there'd been no party. So he insists he's been told there was no party. Why would she have to resign? It makes no sense.
I didn't think she did have to resign in my view at all. And I think
he said he was furious. He said he was furious at the video,
yes, but you looked at
about a party that never existed.
No, but I think he was furious on the fact that the joking was there. But in reality, we know that what's happened when you prepare for things, and sometimes you use black humour. We only saw a very limited amount of that. And I wonder how that recording got out, and I wonder who's behind putting that recording out. Somebody who's trying to do the Prime Minister down. I mean, Prime Minister was nowhere near any party, so...
Well, the scapegoat seems to have been Allegra Stratton tonight. Let me turn to you, Thangham, because Peter Bone asked a question. Why didn't Keir Starmer just say in the Commons today, who was it that told you?
Well, he has 6 questions. I think he used each one of them well. He managed to persuade the Prime Minister relatively easily that whatever the results of the Cabinet Secretary's investigation, they would be handed over to the Met. I think that was pretty successful. I think he managed to expose the fact that there's a real contrast between what Keir Starmer would be like if he was in number 10 and what Boris Johnson's been like. So this denial of the party, but yet somehow Allegra Stratton's had to resign, this makes no sense. And I think this was illustrated very clearly. Only Allegra hadn't resigned by the time we had Prime Minister's questions. But it was, in many senses, it was exposing where the responsibility lies. I think that's exactly what Keir Starmer did today. And he drew a real contrast between his own very measured, thoughtful, but yes, quite strongly expressed questions, and Boris Johnson's kind of all over the place.
Because you still don't have any further details. You've got an investigation into one party that could, throw the whole thing into the long grass, and the Met have said tonight that they're not going to investigate it. So I wonder, is that the end of the road for you?
There wouldn't need to be an investigation if there hadn't been something happening which somebody somewhere clearly wants us to think was a party. Now, I think if it looks like a party, it smells like a party, and it sounds like a party, it probably was a party.
Does Labour have any proof? Do you have any idea of people who were there?
This is not for us to prove. This is for Boris Johnson to explain. It took place in number 10 Downing Street, where I think he is resident. He apparently is still the Prime Minister. He obviously knew there was something happening because he said that it was not a party. So he can't know that nothing existed and wasn't a party without knowing what happened. Now, I think Peter's right, and I will be asking Jacob Rees-Mogg tomorrow morning. I'll give him fair warning. I will ask at business questions, who was it who told the Prime Minister that? But there's so many unanswered questions, aren't there, Peter? So many things aren't answered.
I mean, you're not saying there wasn't a party, presumably.
Well, I don't know what happened, and I think the Prime Minister was told there wasn't a party, and that's what he told the government.
The issue isn't about the party, though, is it? It's about the hypocrisy, and that's the problem, is the fact that we're even talking about a possible party in number 10 Downing Street, which took place on a day when around 500 people died in this country of COVID last year, many of them alone, many of them being separated from their loved ones. That's what's hurting people, isn't it?
And today we saw the introduction of new restrictions. William Ragg, your Conservative colleague, said it was a diversionary tactic. Do you find that unbelievably cynical or believable?
Well, I think perhaps William's wrong on that, because the first thing I thought, oh my gosh, this is a diversion. But then when I checked around, it did seem that the scientists were very, very insistent, because of the huge increase in this new variant, that it had to be announced straight away. Now, it would have been nice if we announced it in Parliament first, that we were able to scrutinise the Prime Minister, and then they could have had as many press conferences as they liked afterwards. But that's, I guess, a separate thing. I don't think it was done to take away what's now called Partygate.
And now you're going to vote against your own government, and you're going to vote with the government. I mean, there is something slightly weird about this, because you've just told us how little you believe what the Prime Minister says, and yet you're going along with his
No, we're going
policies.
along with the scientists.
Okay.
And the scientists who've been measuring the doubling rate of the Omicron variant are telling us very alarming things. I mean, only just last week, I think there was only a handful, and now we're at 580 something. This is really problematic, that we've got a variant that's doubling at a very rapid rate, and the predictions are at the moment that we could have as many as 1 million cases by the end of the month. So we're voting with what the science is pointing us towards. We've done that throughout. I think it's pretty rich, frankly, of the Prime Minister to complain at lunchtime that we're always behind the curve, when we've actually been solidly supportive of every sensible decision that's been taken to protect people, and critically scrutinising when we've needed to be. That includes today. Because, I mean, actually, Peter and I agree on this. I don't think that the Prime Minister should have announced something at a press conference, which is a pattern, I'm afraid, in his government. It's a pattern, and he shouldn't be doing it.
But what I don't understand, are you saying then that Labour would go further and have a complete lockdown because of how serious it is?
We've not said
so you're saying the Prime Minister's got it right with these measures?
No, what I'm saying is that we're at a stage now where we do need to take precautions. We actually thought several weeks ago that we should be having compulsory masks. We called for that several weeks ago. We also called for working from home to be more readily part of the guidance. They've now caught up. The government has now caught up with what we called for weeks ago. So, yes, I'm supportive of that.
They've been too slow. Do you think that this has come in too quickly?
I think certain of the measures are wrong. I think the vaccine passport, there's no benefit whatsoever. It affects our civil liberties. And why not just test people before they go to venues?
Can I ask you about a comment that Boris Johnson made that has been tweeted out? He said, we need to have a national conversation about ways to deal with this pandemic. We can't keep going to lockdowns. And there was a bit more, but, you know, the bulk of what he was trying to say was we can't keep using sort of pharmaceutical methods just because 20% won't get vaccinated. Now, that has been interpreted by some commentators as a sign he's heading towards a compulsory vaccine. Is that what you're hearing?
Well, that's what some media have said, but let's face it, compulsory vaccination would be completely outrageously wrong, and I'd be first to say the Prime Minister should go. That's not what he said.
He should go, did you say?
If we were, yes, he should go if we were going to have compulsory. If you had to stick
that would be enough for you to call for his resignation.
Well, I don't think the whole country would have been up in arms about it. But that's not what he said, of course. And I don't know. I don't know whether Labour are in favour of compulsory vaccination.
Are you?
Well, we'd rather everybody took the vaccine because it's the right thing to do and because it's safe and it's effective.
But I agree with that.
This wouldn't be a suggestion. This wouldn't be a suggestion.
Well, we're still dealing in hypotheticals, aren't we? Where we are at the moment is there's a discussion about that to be had, and I think there is a discussion that we look at the evidence at every stage. At the moment, of course, we would rather everyone was persuaded by the arguments that it's safe and effective.
You're not ruling out compulsory vaccination.
I don't think we should ever rule out anything that is necessary to protect people.
Well, I think that's outrageous.
I think that what we're focusing on at the moment is that the Health Secretary set out today that we need vaccination passports for certain big venues, which incidentally, if the limit is 500, should include the House of Commons chamber, where we can actually fit more than 600 if we choose to. So I think that's quite interesting.
If you have to show your vaccine certification?
Well, that isn't going to happen.
But the Health Secretary said, I think I've got this right, that it's about venues that are indoor venues with more than 500 people. I do think that concludes the House of Commons. Well, I think...
look, if someone told me...
I don't know either.
So they lose Peter Bone from the House of Commons, would they?
You cannot exclude a member of Parliament from the House of Commons.
I know, and that's why I think it would be problematic. However...
No, you can't.
He said...
That's an absolute right of MPs to turn up. But you could not be turned away for not having a vaccine passport. I'm not going to show any vaccine passport.
But you're also not...
Nor are you.
Are you going to show a vaccine passport when you go into a nightclub, though, Peter?
Well, actually, look...
That is the question.
The fact that we are going night clubbing after this show is outrageous, but we don't have to show it tonight.
Please send pictorial evidence. I know Michael Gove will be proud of you both. Thank you very much indeed for coming in. 24 hours after the first pictures of that fateful video had hit the airwaves, the Prime Minister was back in that same room for a hastily organised COVID briefing. He announced that he was enacting Plan B to try and slow down the spread of the new variant. Millions will be asked to work from home, wear masks and, as you've heard, to show COVID passports at some large venues. For some of his own backbenchers, the coincidence was too much, as you've been hearing. One, William Bragg, accused the PM of using a diversionary tactic to move the focus away from the original Downing Street party. So what does the science actually tell us about the spread of Omicron and the usefulness of the announced measures? Here's Deb Cohen.
Across the country, our streets are filling up with shoppers looking for presents, all hoping that this Christmas will be better than last year's. But there are fears that the emergence of the Omicron variant could once again cast a shadow over the nation's celebrations. The government has announced new measures in England in an attempt to slow the spread of the virus. But just how effective will they be?
I think there are very few people who doubt that the vaccines are our most important, essential intervention at this stage.
What do the latest batch of studies show about the effectiveness of them on Omicron?
It's quite complicated. I think we should be preparing ourselves for a reduction in protection against infection. Essentially, the vaccines will lose a bit of efficacy in terms of transmission. I think most people are fairly optimistic that they will retain this ability to protect us against the more severe disease.
And that's the value of booster campaign. It's not, it will reduce the chance of getting infected, but it will certainly much more greatly reduce your risk of getting severe disease and death, keeping you out of intensive care units. Even before Omicron, you cannot guarantee that you would not get the infection and be a risk of infecting others. With Omicron, we already know that it's causing a substantial increase in reinfection rate in South Africa. And it is quite likely that we are going to see an increase in the breakthrough rate of people who have had 2 shots. So ultimately, a passport saying you've been double vaxxed isn't a great indication that you're not going to be infectious. And so it will have some value, but it's not going to be the thing that makes the big difference, I suspect.
So if everyone works from home or worked from home, that would reduce circulation of the virus. Now, there are people who can't work from home. People working in big households, intergenerational households are more likely probably to have jobs that make it difficult to work from home. So it's not a magic bullet.
So taken together, what can we expect the impact of today's announcements to be?
I don't think any of these interventions will bring the R value anywhere close to 1. So we will continue to see fairly rapid increase in infections, at least for the coming weeks. Hopefully, though, the vaccines will suppress that somewhat, enough maybe to delay a bit to get more boosters into arms, reduce the pressures on the health service a little. But it's difficult to see anything that would ultimately control the spread of the Omicron variant that would by itself be tolerable to many sections of the British society.
It's not the news that we were all hoping for, but experts say from a scientific perspective, we're still in a very different place than we were last Christmas.
Deb Cohen there, and joining us now to look a little bit more closely at the issues that Deb's raised. I'm joined by Professor Andrew Hayward, an epidemiologist at University College London, and Kelly Beaver, the Chief Executive of Ipsos Mori. Nice to have you, Kelly. I'll just start with Andrew. Do you think these measures will work, Andrew? What is your sense? Because we just heard in the film that none of them will bring the rate to anywhere close as one. So is there a real point in them?
Well, I think what this is about is slowing down the virus in a sense to buy us more time to get vaccines into more arms. We know that 2 doses is unlikely to be enough to stop the spread of the virus and to dramatically reduce your risk of infection, but it's looking like 3 doses is going to help from the early lab data. So the more we can slow it down whilst we let the NHS do its job and get more of us vaccinated, that's the point. It's not going to turn the curve around. It's going to flatten that curve and buy us more time.
And do you think that the measures that you've seen laid out today are the ones that you would have chosen? Are we missing any? Have we got too many?
Well, I think the most important of those measures is the work from home if you can. For most people who do work, then maybe about 2/3 of their contacts will be at work. And so for those people who can work from home, to cut those out, to cut out having to travel on crowded public transport will make a big difference to transmission. The masks, I think, are the next most effective measure. If we're wearing those in more settings, that will help. I do agree with some of the previous commentators that perhaps the least useful of these is the vaccine passports part of it.
But just explain, though, because it's a slightly odd message that you have to work from home, but you can still go to sort of Christmas parties, you can still celebrate. I mean, is that just accepting that people will do that anyway, or do you find that sort of a mixed message?
I do find it a bit of a mixed message, and I think supposedly the other part of Plan B is to have consistent messaging about being cautious. And I think going to parties, it's difficult to imagine a type of event that is better designed to spread COVID, and to be doing that just before Christmas, before you're going home to relatives, doesn't seem sensible to me.
Kelly, give us a sense of how people are responding now. Are they listening to rules? Are they choosing their own rules? Are people finding their own path to navigate? Or do you think that press conference will have stop people in their tracks and reset us?
Sure, we've been looking at public opinion and concern levels since this virus started circulating in the UK. And to be honest, the public have always been quite a step ahead of the government in their own decisions around taking measures. So in the polls that we did last week, we were already seeing that people were feeling more anxious than they were before, already starting to take measures which were limiting their own social contact in the main. And so, to be honest, and again, also, they've been more likely than perhaps you would believe if you read newspapers every day to follow the kind of government guidance when it does finally come out. So actually, our British public tend to be more compliant than we think they may be with some of the measures.
If we're doing that anyway, or if we're ahead of the steps, then issues of trust or breaking rules at a sort of higher level sounds like they don't actually have any effect. Is that right?
Well, so we've seen a couple of occasions. This is not the first occasion throughout the period of the pandemic when there have been issues with people perceiving that government have broken rules or government officials have broken rules, but yet the public have continued to take decisions for themselves, for their own personal well-being, based on the messages that they see around virus circulating. So no, it hasn't had an impact on how the public take rules on board themselves, but it is having an impact certainly on perceived trust in government, perceived trust in Boris Johnson, and how the Conservative Party ratings are starting to fare.
What do you think? I mean, do you think it becomes harder for the Prime Minister to sort of go out and ask the nation for these things, Andrew? Do you think, would you like to see the scientists do sort of more of the heavy lifting on that stuff?
Well, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that if we lose trust in the messenger, we're going to lose trust in the message, and that really undermines public health, and it just makes the job of the NHS harder. People are having to make, quite heavy sacrifices personally, financially, socially. And we, trust is central to it. Trust is central to vaccine confidence. Trust is central to people following the rules.
But it's also just about knowledge, isn't it? I mean, we're still trying to work out is Omicron, are the symptoms as bad from Omicron as they are from Delta? We know that it's more easily transmitted, but does it make you more sick? Will it lead to more hospitalisations and more deaths? Have you seen any evidence that that's true?
I think we're really overplaying the uncertainties. The thing that is certain is that we have a strain that is moving very, very fast, doubling every few days. We can see in South Africa already that's leading to a dramatic increase in hospitalisations. We know that it escapes immunity to a large extent. Even if there is a bit of a reduction in severity, then this is a recipe for very heavy pressure on the NHS. The NHS is chronically underfunded. It doesn't have the spare capacity to cope with a complete flood of cases, so we do need to slow it down.
And Kelly, what are you seeing more broadly in terms of the sort of pattern of support at the moment, and whether, these sort of peaks and troughs actually leave a lasting legacy on the polls?
Peaks and troughs for the government in terms of...
Well, we've had a rocky few months, whether it's been
we
the
absolutely
discussion
have.
over the party or the Owen Paterson.
Yes, I understand. So since around September time, we've started to see the Conservative Party ratings and Boris Johnson's own ratings really start to take a tumble in the polls, and that has been consistently being eroded. Some of the allegations around sleaze, which historically we've seen sleaze allegations hit governments and not really take effect and not take hold in the public, but there have been multiple different types of issue that the government have had to deal with, which have started to erode public trust.
So is it just going down, or is it going up and down and up and down?
We have a poll coming out at the end of this week, and you will see the results there, but it has been fairly consistent in its trajectory.
Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. So how do we marry together this day of political confusion and precautionary measure? Should our focus be on COVID, because it is far more important than any Christmas party, or should our focus be on the party, as without knowing what happened, will the public choose to trust those making this year's decisions? And what are we to make of that deafening silence from government on the morning broadcast round?
Ministers are nowhere this morning because they don't want to defend this.
This is the shot of our Westminster studio that we would normally show you at this time, but as you can see, there's nobody there today.
Now we've been told that sadly no one's actually accepted our invitation.
We'll be here all week and we'll be back here tomorrow, and we'll be waiting for somebody from that government.
There were no government spokespersons on the media this morning. I see the Health Secretary's made it to the chamber.
Well, we've compiled a political panel together to explore how those issues dovetail. Matthew Parris is a columnist from The Times and The Sunday Times, Sebastian Payne from the FT, and Lucy Fisher from The Telegraph. It was very striking that sort of the empty chairing on so many platforms, across the morning. Lucy, you've been talking to Westminster MPs. What is the sense that you're getting?
Well, apoplexy and incredulity at the Downing Street handling of this scandal, as today it entered its 8th day. We have such a quick turnaround of news stories normally in the political sphere. People have short attention spans, but really there was just such fury I picked up from Tory MPs. One described the mood as bleak, another described it as mutinous. And I think there are growing questions about Boris Johnson's governing style. One Tory MP, a senior member of the party, said to me, he was great getting Brexit done, but as a maverick, he isn't well prepared. He's not a creature of government. He's not used to playing by the rules, going through all the very strict structures and processes you have to do at government. And they thought that was what had come to bear in the past week. That sort of attempt to do things on the fly, get by without really getting a grip on the detail and doing things by the book.
Matthew, it's a strange thing to say in a way, because, it's not Boris Johnson's first position of power. I mean, he was Mayor of London for 8 years. He doesn't know what it's like to be in power. He doesn't know what it's like to have sort of, control of budgets and policies and people and all the rest of it.
He has instincts. One of them, for instance, one being told that there had been a party, was to deny the existence of the party when he was in no position to do that. He has instincts.
Why do you think he did it then?
I think, like little boys in school, when you say, who took that apple? No, it wasn't me, I didn't take that apple, even if he did. I think it's completely instinctive with him, and a lot of the time he seems to get away with it. He fibs.
Do you feel that there is Seb, a sort of gap between the sort of older loyalists and the younger ones that probably have less to lose by speaking their mind? I mean, you've written extensively about the red wall seats and about some of the new MPs who've come in. What is your sense from them?
I would have said that until today, but I actually think some of the younger intake MPs are the ones who are most angry about the COVID regulations, that many of those Conservative MPs who were elected from non-traditional areas at the last election, they're quite libertarian in their mindset. And I think when they look at the idea of compulsory vaccination the Prime Minister hinted at, that goes down very badly. And that new intake of 137 Conservative MPs, they're not melded within the Conservative Party. They don't have that sense of loyalty, partly because most of their parliamentary career has been remote. They've not been in Westminster, they've not been indoctrinated into how you be loyal and go about things. But I think, to go to what Lucy said earlier, I think we are starting to get into the danger zone for Boris Johnson. That one long marcher, an MP who supported him for well over a decade, said to me, Boris has spent a good half of his 9 lives over the past month with the Owen Paterson saga, with this business about Christmas parties, and then bringing in COVID restrictions MPs don't like. And the crucial thing to watch is going to be the North Shropshire by-election next Thursday. Conservatives are already very worried about that, and the Lib Dems think they might have them on the run. If Boris Johnson lost that or came close to losing that...
Could he actually lose that?
The Conservatives got a 23,000 majority, so for him to lose that would be a real sign of deep discontent with voters. The Liberal Democrats think they've got a good shot at it, and senior Conservatives are very worried. So if you see the Prime Minister pinging backwards and forwards to Shropshire, then you know they are in trouble.
Let's just bring up some of the papers, because you'll have a look at them all today, and they're sort of on the same theme, let's say. The Daily Telegraph, Lucy, your paper here, don't go to work but do go to parties. That slightly sort of mixed signal there. And then the PM calling for this national debate about mandatory jabs to fight COVID. That was the one that Peter Bone said he'd he said he'd call for Boris Johnson to go if that happened. The Sun has now sort of entered this story. Do as I say, not as I Christmas do. They call him the Grinch, and he says he faced a backlash over the Christmas party. The Guardian has PM triggers COVID Plan B as party scandal engulfs number 10, drawing those two together. Financial Times, Johnson adopts Plan B to check virus as anger festers over party. The Times has the PM orders return to working from home. Tories held a raucous second party, they're saying, increasing anger amongst Tory MPs about the second one. And the Daily Mail has got one rule for them, new rules for the rest of us. I mean, Lucy, just to go back to your first point, do you think he's still safe? I mean, do you think he's actually worried about losing his job?
Well, look, I think we shouldn't overblow it. He has a commanding 80-seat majority. I don't think he's in immediate danger of being toppled or there being any kind of leadership challenge. But I do think that this is a real moment in time where we're seeing authority slip away from him. I think morale is very poor in the party. It's likely to embolden MPs to rebel more. Already, the government's had a number of revolts on its hands this week over the Nationality and Borders Bill, with a series of amendments in recent weeks over social care. So I think the Prime Minister is in a long-term danger zone. I don't think short-term he is in immediate danger. But nonetheless, there will be a need, I think, to try and struggle on until Christmas and then have some kind of serious reset in the new year.
I think when we look back on this party story, it will seem to have been thrown into a rather strange prominence. And the reason for that, I think, is that the party story itself, it's important, but it's not very important. It didn't involve politicians, as far as we know. It was civil servants. But it has become a lightning rod for a huge amount of dissatisfaction with the Prime Minister himself. And it's that lightning rod, and it's the party as a lightning rod, I think, that is significant. The party itself will be forgotten.
I mean, we don't know. The truth is, at the moment, the line is there was no party, so we don't know who was at the party that didn't exist. We just don't know who was there.
I think the scapegoating of Allegra Stratton was absolutely disgraceful. I know Allegra. She's a good person. The only big mistake she made in her life was working for Boris Johnson, and it wasn't her fault. She didn't even know what sort of question she was going to get. As Peter Bone told you a little while ago, you do those sort of knockabout things in rehearsals. and for the Prime Minister to, as it were, cut the rope and let her go in the way that he did, and seemed to suggest that she was in any way to blame, I thought was indicative
of
him.
And what does that mean?
Well, he has come into a bit of a tangle with a good many people in his career, and someone has always come off worst, and it's never him. Someone's career has been destroyed, and it's never his, and that appears to have been the case with Allegra.
Just to pick up on this, I think when people talk about reset the new year, the usual thing ministers and MPs will say is he needs a new Downing Street, he needs a better cabinet, he needs better advisers around him. This comes to the party issue Matthew was talking about. But what I think Conservative MPs have come to realise over this past month of turbulence, and this last week in particular, is this is Boris Johnson. This is how he is. He is not your normal Conservative leader or normal Prime Minister. The idea that you can bend him, making more sort of traditional in how he operates, that may not happen. And the question is, are Conservative MPs willing to live with that and accept that things are going to be difficult from time to time? You will encounter these things, or do they opt that they want something quite different?
And Lucy, there is this arcane mechanism, isn't there, where if they are unhappy with the Prime Minister, they can write a letter of no confidence, essentially, to the 1922 committee, to Graham Brady, and he never reveals how many letters he has, but we, or presumably you, get a sense of whether those letters are coming in or not, do you?
Well, you always have a lot of speculation among Tory MPs about whether colleagues have entered letters, much rarer for people to admit themselves to having done so. It's a very high bar. You need 54 MPs to enter letters to trigger this mechanism for a leadership challenge and an emotion of no confidence to be held on the Prime Minister. But I'm not so sure we're there yet, as I say. Interestingly, earlier this month, certainly the Telegraph heard from Conservative whips that they were concerned that letters had gone in. So there are certainly jitters in the party machinery. I think right now there is this anger in the party, but also, I must say I slightly disagree with Matthew. I think that this is having big cut through among the public. You know, we saw the comedians Anton Deck joking about it on primetime TV last night. That shows it has entered the national conversation. 2 polls out today from Savanta Comres and Opinion showed that a majority of people think that Boris Johnson should resign. And in one of those surveys, 63% of people thought he wasn't telling the truth about the number 10 alleged party, and only 12% thought he was telling the truth. So I don't think that this party or alleged party will be forgotten quickly. It feels to me much more like a Barnard Castle style debacle that will remain in the national consciousness for quite a long time.
We're out of time, but we really appreciate all your time tonight. Thank you very much, and thanks for coming in. That's all from us this evening, but do join us. We're back tomorrow with Kirsty. That's all from us. Bye-bye.